and my family was too. So my real interest is in actual scale models of the show that I was on. So that's the presentation I brought is those things.
And
The
what did
rest,
you do?
I'm going to tell you in a minute.
Oh, okay.
I'll get there. You're probably going to have lots of questions. That's why I probably have about 3 or 4 hours that I could talk about it, but I'll try and get to the nuts and bolts because I know a lot of you are more interested in the trains themselves. One thing when I was putting this presentation together, thought came into my head that railroads and circus have had a parallel history here in the United States as far as their development. Briefly, the circus came to America from England in the late 1700s. It was basically an equestrian show, a stationary show with maybe one acrobat and one horse. And from there it blossomed into what it is today. It really didn't get moving until like the 1800s when railroads started laying track, and about pre-Civil War, the circuses went out of the wagons, the wooden wheel wagons, and went on the rails. I've tried to show kind of a chronological order here of what happened. The first shows that traveled from being stationary, that actually traveled, were traveled in wagons. And it could be as few as one, as many as 400. And the wagons served dual purpose. Not only they did advertising, but they loaded them with all their equipment and everything inside it. And that continued all through the history as long as we've had wagons. These are some big examples, some G examples of the, I don't know what's right here. These are the ornate, these would be the parade wagons, what you're seeing here, Calliope and mirror wagons. But inside it would all be storage. So they played a dual purpose. How did I get into this? I'm going to tell you a brief story because I was fascinated when we did the Christmas program and when you guys brought up your first train sets. I thought that was one of the neatest programs we had. And it just made me feel good about trains and train collecting. And I started thinking back, well, I didn't have to think back, I actually knew. When I was about 6 years old, and it was about 1952 or 3, I'm not really sure what the year was, a neighbor of mine took me to my first, it's okay, that's kids at the circus. Took me to my first circus, and it was Ringling Brothers, and it was in a tent. It was in Houston, Texas. That's where I was raised. I can remember to this day walking with these people, my arms like this, and all I could see were people and lights, and it was just amazing to me. And then we went and saw the train. And again, that was amazing to me. Watched all, at that time they were still loading them with horses and things. And so I went home that night and that's all I could think about. A couple days later, I was staying with my grandmother and I went to the big grocery, it was a Grant store, which is kind of like a Woolworths type place. And they had a little toy section there, and I saw a circus set. And I fell in love with it. I said, I have to play circus now, Grandma. And so this is what I came home with. The Mark set. This is what started off for me. And this is courtesy of Stuart brought this in. But this was my first circus set. And I still have little pieces of this. I don't have the tin anymore or the box. But I've got some of the people in my warehouse in Las Vegas. And I don't have them here. And I've wagged them around all these years. But that's kind of what started it. Probably the next Christmas, I grew up with there was another boy that was the same age as me. We went all the way through high school. And every year we were both very interested in animals, show business. We loved circus. We always went to them. Well, we ended up joining Ringling Brothers. She is a showgirl, a dancer, and I was a production assistant, basically a stagehand. Stuart thinks I was a clown.
I didn't say that. I've had some girls tell me they think you're a clown.
Well, I am a clown. But that was the first time I was on the show, and we were there for a brief time because, unfortunately, my wife was killed in a car accident. So that was the end of that period. I had to raise 2 kids by myself. When my daughter got to be 18 years old, must have been her blood, because one day she came home and said, "Daddy, what? She says, I just auditioned for the show and I made it. And she went on the show. I went back. I was an assistant performance director, stage director. We stayed there for 6 years. She left and went to Europe with another show. About a year later, I followed, and I stayed in Europe for 7 years with various shows over there. Now, in Europe, circus is entirely different than in America. We kind of look down on circus in America, but over there, it's one of the highest forms of live entertainment. They're like theater. I mean, there's costuming and music and the presentations. Kind of, well, Cirque du Soleil is about the closest thing we have to it in America right now. So I stayed over there in Europe for 7 years. From there, I got remarried. I married a girl from the Moscow Circus, and we traveled Europe, and then we went to Australia and worked for 2 years, all over Southeast Asia. Finally came back to America. Brought my daughter back, and she was married to a German animal trainer. Brought them back, got them a contract with Ringling, did another 4 years, and actually many of the animals that are on the show even today are animals that me and my son-in-law trained. Not to bore you. I don't really have very many pictures because they're all in my warehouse in Las Vegas, but this is a current picture. I'll tell you why I'm going to show you this. This is my son-in-law right here. And these white tigers, my daughter raised from when they were first born.
Which is December.
They're still working. This is from Paris, France. This is the Circus Bouglione, which if you ever saw the movie Trapeze with Burt Lancaster. Anyway, come to find out he had gone to York. And I said, what'd you do there? He said, oh, went to a big train show. And I said, trains? And that's what started all this. He got me into trains!
You should have seen him when I came back from a train trip when we went rail fan up north. He was all over me. Where are the pictures? What do you got?
So, back to my so that's kind of my personal history, why I'm so interested in this. I over the years, I've collected every scale. I've got everything from HO to G to O to O27, you name it. But just lately, I finally kind of settled in, honed in on the O scale stuff, which because I want it to be as real as it. This bottom train here, this is pretty much like the one I lived on, and that my family lived on. I was trying to tell Stuart one of these cars is my car, but I don't think I accidentally didn't bring it. I'm going to tell you about the cars in just a minute, but back to this. So as America laid more track, the circus was able to become more mobile, and they started on the trains. Actually, Barnum, P.T. Barnum, many people think he's a scoundrel, but he was probably the first big show promoter in America. He not only did circus, he had this big museum in New York of oddities and all kinds of weird things. And he said one day, he says, I could probably make a lot more money if I could take this out and show people, because back then people weren't that mobile. So he actually was one of the first ones to put a show on the road and take it to the people. And that was the whole idea in the olden days, was that there wasn't a lot of entertainment available like there is today, so the entertainment had to go to the people. So the railroad really facilitated that, made it easier for them to travel, because in the beginning with these old wagons with the wooden wheels, they were mud shows. And they couldn't go very far in a day because they were pulled by horses, and they'd get stuck and they'd break down. It was a nightmare. Then along comes the railroad, and so they could load them all on the car, go much further, and avoid the mud. So that's how all that came about. Get this, but that's what it's kind of like.
Freudian slip.
Yeah. And this is actually what a performer's car kind of looks like right here, all these clowns out here. But eventually it came to this, and the railroad show was no longer a bad connotation. This is Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey. As you know, most of the shows started in the Indiana, Peru area. That's where Ringling started. Eventually, the Ringling Brothers bought Barnum and Bailey and combined the two shows into the Greatest Show on Earth. Greatest Show on Earth is a trademark You hear a lot of people use it sometimes, and they're paying a lot of money to use that, because they're the only ones that can use that greatest show on earth logo and symbol. If you notice on the flyer stuff, they say world's greatest show. That was the Ringling original, that's what they originally called the Ringling Brothers Circus. And later, when they combined with him, it became the greatest show on earth.